Our next speaker is our first keynote speaker, Lucy Saunders, who's joined us all the way from London. We are very fortunate to have Lucy here with us in Sydney today. She is a woman in demand. She's a public health specialist, an urbanist, and a transport planner, and she created the Healthy Streets approach, which is an evidence-based framework. Evidence isn't always something we hear a lot about. It's an evidence-based framework, which, as I mentioned before, now permeates every level of thinking in London. Her work is highly influential, and Lucy has now presented this work to countries all over the world who, as we are right now, are really starting to get to grips with the challenges of creating healthy and vibrant places. Lucy's a fellow of the UK Faculty of Public Health, and she has a master's degree in geography and in public health, and she's also a mate of mine as well, so it's my very great honour to be able to welcome her to the stage. Thank you for joining us, Lucy. Thank you.
I first developed the Healthy Streets approach back in 2011, which was not long before I first met Mark, and we were both at that time deeply frustrated in that we wanted to make things different and better, and we couldn't work out how to do it. What I'm going to be talking about this morning is the story of what has happened since then and the process that I went through to try and implement my Healthy Streets approach in London. I think there's a huge number of parallels with every town and city everywhere. We're all facing the same challenges and trying to find our way through. So I hope that you'll find that you can draw some messages from this that you can apply in your own thinking and your own work. So I think what we're all looking at is how can we take the situation that we've got today and have a new approach that is putting people first. Because when we look around ourselves and we look at our environment, what's been done over previous decades has not been putting people first. And the starting point for most of us is, what are our priorities when we're putting people first? For me, as a public health specialist, my priority is giving everybody a fair chance to live well. So how can I enable more people to have healthy lives and happy lives and to live longer and live better for longer? So I'm about to show you a graph which is a little bit depressing. And just to make it really obvious that it's depressing, it's all grey, but the presentation gets more colourful as we go along. So we start low and we build. Don't get too depressed at this point. Here we go, top causes of illness and early death amongst Australians. What a cheery topic to focus on. So this is what we should be thinking about, this is what we should be worrying about, this is what keeps me awake at night, is thinking about these graphs of doom. Why did I choose to leave the warm bosom of my public health community and head out into the hostile land of transport planning? The reason why is because the transport system, how we manage our streets and public spaces, has quite big impacts on public health, on these 5 big issues here. Physical activity, road traffic injuries, air quality, noise pollution, and severance. Severance is a term that we use to describe people finding it difficult to get from where they are to where they want to be. And I think we've had a really nice example already this morning of the challenges of daily life that come from a built environment that isn't fit to serve our needs. And these 5 big health issues, they all relate to how we choose to manage motorised road transport. It is a choice that we're making about how we use that space, and if we choose to use that space differently, we get different outcomes. So where do these top 5 health impacts of the transport system fit on our graph of doom? We've got low physical activity down there at the bottom at number 14. But also we know that physical activity impacts our health in so many ways that we can also look at a whole range of other aspects of this graph of doom and see that actually if we get people more active, we can also address overweight and obesity to an extent, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, occupational risks, high cholesterol and kidney disease. So actually if we can get people active every day, we can have quite a big impact on the top causes of illness and early death amongst Australians. And how about the others? Well, air pollution is there at number 11. Road traffic injuries are kind of scattered through. So there's road traffic injuries that relate to people who are intoxicated, killing or injuring themselves or someone else on the roads. There's people who are injured when driving as part of their work practices. And then there's road traffic injuries that result in people fracturing bones. So that's where road traffic injuries feature. Noise and severance don't appear on this graph, and that's not because they're not important, it's because they're not as easy for us to measure and disentangle and put on graphs. But we must always remember that those things that aren't easy to measure, that doesn't mean that they're not important. We just need to find better ways of measuring them. So I think it's probably obvious to you why I chose to go and work with my transport colleagues, because if I can have an impact on all those coloured bits of that graph, then as a public health specialist, I can have quite a huge benefit on the health of the population, which is my motivation. So those are my top priorities. But there's also a whole range of other people who I work with who aren't public health specialists, who don't care about health, or don't feel very comfortable talking about health and well-being. So often I don't talk about these huge health benefits that come from changing street environments and transport, and I focus on the issues that other people care about because they're all tied together. So some of the other big challenges for urban areas are, we've heard a lot in the news today about climate change, but there's also the pressures on families who are struggling day to day and week to week in terms of the cost of living, dealing with the stresses of congestion. We've already had a mention of the race to get to the cheap parking. It's one of those things that everyone's trying to juggle in their minds every day, just how do I get through the logistics of this day. Improving our quality of life, and for the public sector there's some real challenges in terms of how are we going to deal with rising public service costs, which are impacting on everyone in terms of taxes as well. So these issues, I think you probably all know a lot about these already. You talk about them as part of your daily work, trying to juggle all these policy priorities. But I think the real success in making progress, in moving forward, is in the framing of these issues. I think if nothing else, think about the framing, because we've all known for a long time these are problems that we need to address, but getting that breakthrough, I think, comes with a different way of framing what it is that we want to do. And the framing that I developed is the Healthy Streets approach. This is based quite simply on the indicators of a healthy street environment. You can go up to people in the street, you can try it, I do it myself, and say, what do you think healthy street means? And they'll start describing for you these indicators. It's intuitive, it makes sense to people, and it means that a lot of people can very quickly start working together on making change happen. So I'm going to briefly run through the indicators and show you a few little examples along the way. Easy to cross is the first indicator. It's relating to that issue of severance I mentioned earlier on. And the image I've got here is what I think of as a bit of a Best Buy for healthy streets. It hasn't got a snappy name. If you can think of a good name for this, I think you could find a name for yourself in terms of fame in the world of transport planning. But it's currently called by some a continuous footway, and basically it's on residential streets. The pavement, the footpath, continues straight across at the end of it, so that when people are driving into their own street, they stop and very slowly go up and over that pavement into their own street. So the responsibility is put on the person driving to look out for the people who are walking around in that environment, and it sets a very clear signal that this is a people place, and it makes a huge difference to the walking experience of a whole range of people, in that they don't have to stop and do a risk assessment every few steps as they're crossing side streets. Shade and shelter. I find this quite a tough sell in the UK, so you're going to give me a really easy ride in that you know better than anyone the importance of shade and shelter, and I've just been full of admiration walking here this morning at just how much you have already. This is an example from Chicago, and the reason why I use this picture is because it shows another important element of healthy streets, which is that it's not down to the transport planners to deliver these indicators, it's down to a wide range of stakeholders. So in this picture you can see that there's the urban greening team have been involved in putting those street trees out, probably working in partnership with the transport planners and all the utility companies to make sure that they work. But we've also got the architects and the businesses putting in their role in terms of shade and shelter as well. Places to stop and rest. We all need them. They're not just for people who've got mobility impairments or older people or people with young children, but all of us need to stop and rest at regular intervals on our journeys. And if we want people out on the streets interacting and connecting, we need to provide places to stop and rest. Not too noisy. This is an example, probably familiar to many of you, of one of the plazas in New York where they took out traffic lanes and created spaces where people could actually have a conversation without shouting. People choose to walk and cycle. The key word here is choose. We have to create an environment in which the choice is to walk or to cycle. And that sometimes means making the choice to drive a bit more difficult. And that's the challenge with creating environments in which people choose to walk and cycle. If it is easier and more convenient to go in a car, most of us are going to want to go in a car. It's the way the human mind has evolved over many millions of years that we try and conserve energy and have a nice, easy, comfortable time. So if we make it too easy to drive, then we won't choose to walk and cycle, however good the facilities are. This picture here is from one of the suburbs on the outskirts of London. It's an environment that is very car dominated. It's a very conservative community who live here, and when I show this picture in London, most people don't realise that it's a picture from London, and when I tell them which borough it's from, they're even more gobsmacked because they can't believe this has actually been built in London, given the urban planning context in this particular suburb and also the local community and their attitudes. The success, I think, has come from making the street better for everyone. It's more attractive, more appealing, and more pleasant part of the community. And that means it's got more people on board with the concept of creating more space for walking and for cycling. You'll see there's still quite a lot of traffic in a big fat traffic jam. There were traffic jams before and there are traffic jams now, but they at least have another option if they don't want to sit in their car for hours on end. So, people feel safe. Safety obviously is not just in terms of road traffic injuries, but also social safety, community safety. This picture here is from Freiburg, and it's two young women, one's rollerblading and one's cycling through their community. We see teenage girls have got the lowest levels of physical activity. There's a whole range of reasons for that, but I think when you see them out walking and cycling and being active, it's a sign that you've got your built environment right from a community perspective. Things to see and do. My transport planning colleagues get a bit grumpy that one of the indicators is things to see and do. They don't really see it as their job. And that's fine, because it's not just the job of the transport professionals to deliver healthy streets, it's the job of all of us. But I like this picture because this shows how each of us in our own small way can help to deliver the healthy streets indicators. So this one resident has chosen a nice bright yellow box of geraniums to put on their window ledge, which makes a very boring walk along a very drab street a little bit more interesting. So we can all contribute to delivering healthy streets. People feel relaxed. This indicator captures a number of issues that cause a lot of the niggles in our lives when we're walking and when we're cycling. So nice, wide, smooth, even pavements that we can move along are a core part of delivering healthy streets. And this example here is from Seoul. Clean air. Air quality is a big issue everywhere. Where there are cars, there's an issue with air quality that impacts on our health. Even with electric vehicles, we have particulates from tyre and brake wear. There's no safe level from a human perspective of breathing in these small particulates. So electric vehicles are better than non-electric vehicles, but they do not solve this problem for us. It's only by reducing car use overall that we can start to really have a big impact on this issue in urban areas. And this is a picture of another street in London. This is called Van Gogh Walk, and it's interesting. It looked like every other residential street with the traditional layout, the usual carriageway space in the middle and footpath on either side, and the designers just went, let's start from scratch, let's have a completely different perspective on this. It's a key walking route for kids going to school, and it's an absolute pleasure to walk along and for children to play in compared with what was there before. Everyone Feels Welcome is about making sure that our streets feel inclusive to all of us, whatever mood we're in, and whatever age we are and wherever we've come from. This example here is from Stockholm, where they've been just in quite a light touch and low cost way creating streets that feel welcoming for everyone by placing a couple of planters and seats at the entrances to certain streets so that everyone can walk and cycle down and spend time in those streets. So healthy streets is not all about spending big money, digging up streets, building line to building line and laying them out differently. It's just about how we choose to prioritise the space between the buildings. So these 10 indicators, they don't come in a list, they come in a circle. And the reason they come in a circle is because they're all equally important and they all interrelate with each other. They're not a list of 10 things you will find on a street. They're 10 aspects of the human experience of being on the street. And you have one brain in your body and you experience everything at once. So if you find it noisy, you're probably not going to feel very relaxed, and you're probably not going to feel very safe, and you're not going to really feel like you want to walk or to cycle or to spend time on that street. So all of these indicators all just are little clues as to what we need to think about to change the way people feel when they're on streets. So these are our 10 Healthy Streets indicators. These are the basis of the Healthy Streets approach. But now I want to take you on to the next step in my journey. Between 2011 and 2015, I did a lot of work on healthy streets, but it wasn't until I got a senior level champion that things really started to get rolled out at scale in terms of changing not just the practice of people who wanted change to happen, but people who didn't even know it was part of their job. That senior level champion started making healthy streets systematic, which is where you get the true benefits. My champion was the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. When he came into office in May 2016, he had a very forward-thinking deputy mayor for transport, and she really sold the concept of healthy streets to him, and this is where it really took off. When mayors say positive things, or any kind of champion or political leader says something that you're pleased to hear, it's very important that you quickly get it down in writing before they move on to the next topic. So rushed out a vision document. So this is called Healthy Streets for London. It came out not long after the mayor was starting to say the kind of things that I like to hear. And this document said that in London we would start putting people and their health at the heart of decision making. This sentence is very important, and it's very difficult to get politicians to say this. There will be a clear shift away from private car use. They find that very hard to say, so it's quite a big statement when it happens. There are 3 levels of delivering healthy streets. I don't have time to go into that in a lot of detail today, but needless to say, it's not just about taking street by street individual locations and tarting them up a bit. And finally, and this is, I think, the most important part of Healthy Streets, is that there is a standard that needs to be met in terms of those 10 Healthy Streets indicators. If we're not measuring everything consistently using a robust set of indicators, then the term Healthy Streets can just be used as a bit of a health wash on anything that anyone happens to do. It's only by meeting certain standards that are going to deliver a measurable public health benefit that I can really say that I feel proud of work being named Healthy Streets. The vision document, well, I'm sure many of you in this room have seen vision documents come and go. Sometimes a bit depressing going through your back catalogue of all of the things that have been said and then didn't maybe happen. So the vision document very quickly needs to get put into something a bit more concrete. And in London, because Healthy Streets is not just the job of the transport department, while the 2 big ones are the spatial plan, the London plan, and the transport strategy, and they both have healthy streets in. Healthy streets is the framework of the transport strategy and a key policy in the spatial plan. It's also in every other statutory mayoral strategy, and that includes the health strategy, the policing plan, the housing plan, the environment plan, the economy plan, the culture plan, all of them. It means everyone has to work together to deliver the 10 Healthy Streets indicators. It means everyone's got a place at the table, everyone's got a stake in the decisions that are being made. And that's really important, because if we leave the design and management of our streets to one professional group, they will do the very best they can within the limits of their powers, their influence and their skill set. And our streets are too important and they have too many different impacts on our lives that they could just be left to one group to do their best with. We have to work together on them. The policy documents, those strategies, sometimes they sit on the shelf too. Previous mayor's transport strategies in London didn't have a very close connection with how the money was actually being spent. So there was a good long-term plan, but if you looked at how the money was being spent year in and year out, there wasn't an obvious connection between the two. And what was different this time around is that there was a very clear connection between the long-term plan and how the money was allocated for spending. These are the top-level targets for London. So the top goal is an 80% sustainable mode share by 2041. And this is in the context of really dire financial circumstances for transport in London. So that mode shift can't happen as it has done in the past by massive increases in public transport provision. It has to be more about shifting people out of car onto bicycles and walking more. Underneath this top-level target, there are these sub-targets that all feed into it. So everyone doing 20 minutes of walking or cycling a day. Currently, even though London is an extremely walkable city with very high levels of public transport use, only about 30% of adults on the previous day walked or cycled for 2 10-minute periods. Shows how big the challenge is to get people active. Even in a city that you might think everyone has to routinely walk and cycle, there's still huge car dependence. Zero road deaths and serious injuries, reductions in carbon emissions, reductions in freight in the city centre, and reductions in private car trips. All these have to work together. We're not going to get everyone walking and cycling if the streets feel dangerous. We're not going to have everyone walking and cycling more if it's just as easy for them to drive. So all of these things connect, and the top goal is this 80% sustainable mode share. The way this is played out in terms of delivery, in terms of governance, is there's the strategy, the 25-year plan, and then the business plan says the first 5 years of delivering this 25-year strategy is going to look like this, and here is the money that we're going to spend to make it happen. And that's really fundamentally important. But trying to get people who have got busy, stressful lives and busy, stressful jobs to think about a 25-year horizon or even a 5-year horizon in terms of their everyday decision making is challenging. So the most clear demonstration that people have got it and know what they're doing in terms of healthy streets shows up in the scorecard. So the scorecard is an internal document for the Transport Authority where they have a set of targets that have to be achieved by the end of the year. And maybe most fundamentally, the bosses only get their bonus at the end of the year if the targets are met. Really focuses the attention on the things that are important. So what goes in that scorecard makes a big difference in terms of what happens day to day within a very large bureaucratic organisation. This is where change happens, is with this 1-year scorecard. It's not enough just to have the right words in the documents. People need to know what you want them to be doing differently. And so to make that happen, I developed with each professional group a tool to help them implement healthy streets in their day job. And every tool is very different, and they've all got their pros and cons, and I won't go through all of them now, but I'm going to show you just some of the tools that we have so far. This is the suite as it stands of the ones that have been published. The first one, and the most important one, is the Guide to the Healthy Streets Indicators. And any of you who are coming to the workshop this afternoon will be using this, so you'll get to see how it works in practice. It's a qualitative assessment tool for streets that you can apply to a project, to a proposal, or to an existing street. It's got a list of prompt questions, which we're going to be going through. And in the London version of this tool, there's also images of different streets where this approach has been taken for each of the indicators. This is the example for the easy to cross indicator. And it was important for us to emphasise that healthy streets is not about spending big budget or doing very big, difficult things that take a long time. So the images are deliberately chosen of not particularly glamorous, low-cost things that have been done, mainly in the more car-dominated parts of the city that maybe didn't think that healthy streets was for them. Maybe they thought, oh, healthy streets is an easy thing to do in the CBD, but it's not really relevant to us. It is absolutely relevant to the suburbs. That is where the biggest gains can be felt in terms of mode shift. So that's the Guide to Healthy Streets Indicators. The next tool is a tool for implementing light touch and temporary changes. So Mark mentioned the car-free day this morning. We've got the play streets, which is temporary closures of streets for kids to go out and play. We've got parklets, which is where car parking spaces are changed over to be seating areas to try and reduce on-street parking and increase the provision of places to stop and rest. And then this picture just over here is a trial of a new road layout. There's a problem when roads are built straight and you have cars with the capabilities that cars have got today, which is they can go really, really fast at almost no effort on the part of the person driving. So we're actually actively trying to introduce some curves to our streets so that people will start driving in a more courteous manner when they're going through communities. And this is where one of those layouts was being tried so the drivers could see how it felt before they then made it permanent. We have on-street surveys. And the reason why we have on-street surveys is our way of assessing how Londoners felt about streets and the experience of being on streets used to be a household phone survey. So you'd ring someone up on their landline when they're trying to cook dinner and ask them to give you a score out of 10 of how satisfied they were with streets. The data was not of any use to anyone. 7 was the answer. 7 means leave me alone, I'm trying to cook my dinner, but I'm trying to be polite about it. So we moved away from the household phone surveys and we went out onto the streets and stood there from 6 a.m. till 10 p.m, 7 days a week, stopping people at random and saying, right here, right now on this street, how noisy are you finding it? And then sometimes have to repeat ourselves a few times till they'd heard the question. And then we got much more real data in terms of how different people felt about the streets and how different streets performed at different times of day, at different times of the year, and in different weather. This is an example of one street in one of our outer suburbs. The changes aren't particularly exciting and radical. That's not really what Healthy Streets is about. It's about shifting the balance away from car dominance. So there was an advisory cycle lane that was replaced with a bidirectional cycle track. The walking experience wasn't vastly improved. The pavements are still really narrow, but we did put in more crossing points. And by reducing the space available to the people driving, it meant they drive much more courteously, much more slowly when they're manoeuvring, because nothing a driver fears more than clipping their wing mirror on an oncoming car. So if there's any risk of that, you can get them to drive really slowly. So these changes we made, and we did the survey on street, and then we went back several years after the changes were made, because change doesn't happen fast, and we did it again. And this graph shows the change in what random people who were stopped on the street said. So these aren't the same people asked before and after, it's just stopping people at random. What do you think? And they felt that the streets were better. This kind of data is very useful for supporting local politicians who are dealing with a mailbag full of the few very angry people who just like things as they were. They need this kind of data to support them to go on and do the next street and the next street. The Healthy Streets Check for designers. This is possibly the most famous tool. It's the tool that's used by our engineers on every single project in London, doesn't matter how small it is. And it's a boring old spreadsheet, because that's what the traffic engineers said they wanted, and they love it. And we can take a street location like this. This is Archway in North London, where we had a 4-lane gyratory going through a community, and we changed it into a walking and cycling space, and we rerouted the buses and the cars. It was all very complicated. But we can apply this tool before we build anything to check that what we're about to spend millions and millions of pounds of public money on is actually going to deliver a real benefit to people. And if it looks like there are opportunities to tweak the design to deliver even bigger benefits, we can do that before we've built it. So this is how the results are produced, and these are published in the consultation materials for every project. So the community can see what is being proposed before they say that they want it or that they don't want it. The blue line in the middle shows what the baseline score was for that street environment in terms of the Healthy Streets indicators, and the red line shows what the proposed change to that street was going to deliver. The aim of the game for the traffic engineers is to make sure the red line is always outside of the blue line. When the red line goes inside the blue line, they get sent back to the drawing board. But that's what we're looking to do. And sometimes we can make big changes and sometimes we can only make small changes. But this tool really helps the designers to see what is the priority. What do we need to focus on? What do we need them to be doing differently? And how can they do it in terms that totally make sense to them? We do monetize the health benefits for the business cases. To do this, we have to do baseline counts of walking and cycling before projects happen and after they've been delivered, so we can get a general sense of what kind of changes deliver what kind of uplift in walking and cycling. But these numbers are really powerful, and they help to balance up against the hypothetical notion that increased time spent in a car costs the economy, society, etc. money. So beyond the tools, probably the biggest part of delivering change is making sure that people really understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, why they would want to do it, and why they're going to advocate for it with other people. So I spent a year working with groups of 13 at a time. I've decided 13 is the perfect number of people to run a training session with, because everyone gets a chance to speak and ask questions. No one can hide, no one can sit at the back on their laptop. But it's not too much of a grilling. If it was one-to-one, it might be a bit intimidating. So 13 people at a time, sitting for 3 hours, standing up, walking around. It's quite an active session, training on what Healthy Streets is and why they should be caring about it. So in London, just in the Transport Authority alone, I trained 500 members of staff. And that was only scratching the surface. When you look at the turnover of staff, the size of an organisation that's got 30,000 members of staff in total, it's an ongoing process of keeping everyone focused on why they need to be doing things differently. But it's such an important part of making change happen. And we're nearing the end. Number 9 is tracking progress. So I mentioned before that the only way you can really know that change is happening is if you've got a robust way of measuring it over time and seeing that things are heading in the right direction. And if they're not, then you can intervene and fix what's not working. So the way of tracking progress in London is using the mystery shopper methodology, which is usually applied to going into coffee shops and clothes stores and sending in a mystery shopper to assess how helpful the staff are and how easy it is to find what they're looking to buy. But it's been used in the transport sector for a long time, particularly on public transport, for assessing the customer experience of public transport. But in London, we'd never thought to actually transfer that beyond the public transport services to how do the streets perform themselves from a customer perspective. And so what we have now is a group of trained assessors who are sent out to locations that are chosen at random across the city. And we've got a little map here of London in the bottom left-hand corner. All those dots, those are the locations that were chosen over the last year. So 1,500 locations were assessed last year using this phone app. When the mystery shopper gets to their designated location, the app is activated, stop them from sitting in a cafe when it's raining and filling it in, or sitting at home watching TV filling it in. So they have to get to their street location. So when they get there, they have to walk 50 metres along the street, cross it at a safe point, 100 metres back, cross the street at a safe point and back to their beginning. And they do that over and over again for 45 minutes. And while they're walking this circuit, they're answering 100 quantitative questions about every element of what the street looks and feels like. It's far more comprehensive than asking people a snapshot of how they feel or asking the engineers how wide the pavement is. It covers every issue you could imagine might happen on a street. Good things like are children playing, and bad things like are people having a screaming argument. All of these things are captured in this tool for us to see how our streets feel. And because it's done on such a massive scale, then you can start seeing where the patterns lie. Is it that the street cleansing isn't good enough? Is it that this particular borough is just not pulling its weight as well as its neighbouring borough? So you can start delving into all these details. The coloured blobs here show you the 6 key areas of the app that are filled in, but huge wealth of data that means we can track over time and means that I will be able to go back in 10 years and see whether London actually did make the streets healthier. And that's really the important thing, that it wasn't just a nice thing that a mayor once said. And finally, the last step is about bringing your friends along. So I do still work in London, but I work with many other cities as well, because Healthy Streets wasn't developed for London, it was developed for cities and towns everywhere. I come from a very rural place, and Healthy Streets applies in the village that I grew up in just as much as it does in a global city. And I don't see this as a challenge for one town or one city. I see it as a global challenge that we're all trying to work on together, and the strength comes from us working together and pushing in the same direction. So some of the cities that are looking at this, we've got Auckland in New Zealand, Singapore, Budapest in Hungary, and Altrincham in Greater Manchester. So a real variety of different places that are looking at what can they do differently and how can they use this Healthy Streets framing to deliver the change that they want to see. So now I look around and I see streets. I'm constantly doing my mental Healthy Streets assessment as I'm walking around and thinking, where next? Thank you.